The Old School is brought to you by Ahart Solutions, which provides school surveys and applied research. More information at ahartsolutions.com. And good morning. Welcome to the Old School podcast about primarily education system here in the United States, but it does happen that we venture from time to time to other areas with food, culture, travel. And it is with travel and a little bit of history and a little bit of culture that we rest today. And in that endeavor is my good friend, Dr. Stephen Bourgeois. Good morning, sir.
Hey, Miller. Good to see you and hear you today. And we're going to talk.
So, ever since we told the listening audience that we were going to once a week, we have missed that deadline twice, I think.
Oh, I blame you? No, I guess I should blame myself. I don't know. It's
I think we both share in the blame.
Yeah, it's hard. It's really hard to do this stuff, every day.
We don't have to do it every day. We just have to do it every weekend.
That's right. I'm just getting up here, Miller. I'm a little tired. It's 11:30 a.m. What do you expect?
If you weren't such a powerful personality and a scene, a fixture on the educational scene, maybe you'd have a little bit more time for peons like us.
Come on now. I'm curious about this conversation. So you're talking like we're doing something completely new, and we've done this about 40 times. What we're about to do. Typically, you go someplace and we make jokes about it.
So that's kind of the bad thing is that initially it was the idea that we were going to record while I was away.
Yeah,
because that's a tradition here with
right.
the Old School podcast.
Yeah,
but it didn't work out, and so I'm back at home, and we're going to talk about where I was, but we're just not going to have the on the scene reporting, as it were.
well, you could pretend, like you're traveling. You're kind of unshaven, unkempt in the hotel room. I'm used to that, where you come on mumbling. You've done it in Germany. You've done it in Italy. Every place else. Let's pretend, shall we?
You don't think the listening audience will not have heard the first few minutes of this podcast and realize that I'm not?
Nobody listens
And
to that part. It's just you droning on, and then they jump forward a little bit till they get into the meat of the thing.
so guess where I am now, Steve?
Oh, tell me, Ross.
I am in your nation's capital, our nation's capital, Washington, D.C.
This is silly. You're in your.
It is silly. It was your idea.
Well, we've taken it as far as we can.
Okay.
Let's reflect back to where you were 1 week ago today. How's that?
1 week ago today, I was in Washington, D.C. Now, what's interesting is that you told me you have never been in our nation's capital
Haven't set foot in the place.
by design or simply a lack of opportunity.
Um, there's some places I've never been. One is that part of the East Coast.
Right?
Haven't been to New York City ever. I've been in a lot of other places, but not there.
Well, I guess you have to go to New York City. I'm not sure if someone gave me a list of places to go visit, I'm not sure how high up New York City would be.
What are you
I mean,
talking
I
about?
like it and all.
Well, you're prejudiced because you're from Baltimore. They don't like any place.
No, I like New York City fine. I don't like the sports teams. They are a bit they're a bit overbearing, but otherwise, I mean the city's fine.
When you say you like something fine, there's always a but coming very quickly.
No, but if we were in Washington D.C., uh my wife was getting recognized for something at work, and so we flew up there. She was going to go up there, but then my daughter and I decided to go, and my daughter had never been to Washington D.C. And so it seemed rather an opportune time to take her and to show her a little bit because we're only there for a few days. But it was an incredible experience,
Really?
and certainly one that I would recommend to anyone who wants to go to Washington D.C.
Well, that's quite a recommendation, Herr Miller.
This-
If you're in
What
the
what
area,
would you
why don't
say?
you?
Say again?
Well, if you're in the area, you might as well stop in Washington, D.C.
Oh, come
Um,
on,
well, you lived
it
there.
deserves a little more consideration than that.
No, you lived there practically. You lived across the river. Is that right?
Well, not across the river, but down the way. Yes, I was only about 40 minutes away.
Okay. So you probably went there often yourself, right? As a younger man.
I did go a few times as a younger man. I used to go watch the Capitals play, the hockey team, but they used to actually play in Landover, Maryland. So there was kind of like a suburb of DC. But no, I had a couple of friends that lived in DC, and and there was one time in the Marine Corps where I woke up in someone's living room, this girl's living room, and
What?
she lived in Georgetown, and I'm not 100% sure how I got there, but she was very lovely, and yeah, and had a good time. But otherwise, I don't really remember much about the experience. But that was a fine time.
So are we going to cut that that part out here, Miller?
Oh, what do I care? I didn't say her name. I don't know her name.
That's the point.
But no, I mean, I've had a few good opportunities to visit DC. I mean, there's a one of the places I love to eat is Ben's Chili Bowl, which is kind of they're known for their half smokes and
They're what?
hot dogs with chili.
Half smokes or hot dogs?
Yeah. So or sausage, you can get them sausage or you can get them as hot dogs, what have you. And then
Yeah.
so it used to be one of my go-to places. It's just down from U Street, not far from Howard University. If you ever get to that neck of the woods, and it's a fun city to be in, and we have already done a couple of states as part of a infrequent look at the different parts of the United States. And I thought since I just came back from DC, maybe it's time to give a little love and give a little attention to our nation's capital.
Okay. So I'm going to sit back as like one of your students in history class, and so how are you going to attack this? Because and you can go a lot of directions. So I'm curious how you're going to do this.
So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to give kind of a backdrop of the development of the city and how it came to be what it is today. And then I thought we can maybe bounce around some ideas about things that the city is known for, and to whatever degree its merits to visit or that sort of thing. So,
Well, do it. You have the floor.
all right.
I'm excited to learn a few things. I pulled up a map next to me, and I've learned that Washington, D.C. is not that far from Delaware.
Sure. I don't think anyone has ever given directions relative or not in relation to Delaware, but
Well, isn't that where the Redskins play in Washington, D.C.?
in Delaware.
Well, I don't know. There's no Delaware football team, I don't believe.
No, they play in not in the old RFK Stadium. That's where they used to play.
Okay.
So I think they either built a new stadium or they renovated RFK Stadium, which is a great stadium, by the way,
Yeah.
because here's one of the early times I visited the city is RFK Stadium is in DC, and that is where I saw in 1986 the Grateful Dead.
Okay.
So that was good. That was my first experience with a lot of things, not least of which certain products that are legal in some states and now legal in other states. And I did not partake, but certainly there was a lot of people. I probably had a pretty good contact buzz going by the time it was all said and done.
You,
But
you didn't inhale. You're using that excuse. Um, well, okay. I was joking about the Delaware thing, but I do have a map in front of me, so I'm
so
gonna.
the map is going to come in handy.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you why, because DC as it is shaped and how it looks has changed over time since it was initially established.
Okay.
So one of the cool things when you sit here and you look at some of these states and areas of our country is to look back at the fact that there were Native Americans that lived there prior to. And this area that is DC, and no political jokes intended here, used to be a swamp. So at some point they drained the swamp, and these initially, and you had all these various, Native American tribes, the Nakachtok and the Piscataway people were the
Okay.
kind of the primary groups that lived here, but they also had these various ancillary groups that existed along the fringes, and they kind of occupied the areas around the Potomac River, which is the major river that flows through DC. And if you're my age, and I don't, I'd be interested to know, do you recall an event that happened in the 1980s involving the Potomac River?
Potomac River, wasn't there a airplane that went down there?
It was. And remember, the Potomac was kind of partly iced over,
Yeah.
and there was like people that were jumping from the banks into the water to try to get people out of there. And it was a huge deal, and it was like national. You couldn't tear your eyes away. And I remember, I think I was home because it was snowing or what have you. I think it was, I can't remember if it was a snow day or if it was vacation, but yeah, plane crash into the Potomac River. So that river is the main river that kind of cuts through the city of Washington today.
Okay, I see it here right on the map. I
Yeah.
never had that association. I haven't thought about that in a long time.
Yeah.
Okay.
So when the United States starts to form, one of the questions, of course, was where the capital was going to be. Now, initially, when you have the beginnings of formulating the government, a lot of these guys were hanging out in Philadelphia. Philadelphia is where you find Independence Hall. It's where you find the Liberty Bell. It's where, there's a lot in Philadelphia that is reminiscent of where our first government was. This is where the Second Continental Congress was. This is where the Second Continental Congress wrote the Articles of Confederation, which was our first constitution. But eventually, even this early, there were concerns by some people, particularly in the South, that it seems like a lot of the important stuff is in the North. It is a reason why George Washington was named the commander of the Continental Army, because he was from Virginia. The fear was you got all these bigwigs, you got all these power players, and they all come from the northern states. And so therefore they'll make all their decisions based upon what's best for the northern states. And so one of the first bones that was thrown to the South was the notion of George Washington as the commander of the Continental Army. The second bone was that the capital was going to be moved down to where it is today, or it's going to be moved someplace. Now, initially, it was in Philadelphia. It had also spent time in Boston. It had also spent time in New York. It also spent time in York, Pennsylvania for a short time as the government was kind of running around from the British during the war. And what's eventually settled on is a perfect diamond that would be based off land that was ceded from Virginia and Maryland. Okay. Now, if you're looking at a map, you can see it's not a perfect diamond. That's because something has changed. We'll talk about that in a second.
Hmm.
One of the early architects of the building of the Capitol was a Frenchman by the name of Pierre Charles L'Enfant. And if you go to Washington, D.C. today, one of the central metro stops where all the lines kind of go through is the L'Enfant Plaza. He is responsible for the idea of the mall, the National Mall. The problem was that initially, uh, his entire scope of what he was thinking of was not able to be done. But he's the one that put the city inside of a grid pattern. Now, if you ever been to DC, you know that that grid pattern, while it sounds logical in some ways, is not logical in a practical sense, because in the city you have a southeast, southwest, northeast, northwest quadrant, and then you have a lot of these roads that only travel in one direction. That's one of the reasons why DC is hard to drive. That's why it's just better to jump on the metro and just go to wherever you want to go. But L'Enfant is the one who kind of essentially set that up. Now, the White House starts construction in the early 1790s. It is completed by 1798, 99. That makes John Adams the first one to live in the White House. it will be Thomas Jefferson who will be the first president to live his entire term in the White House. The problem was we still have an issue with the British. 1812, the city is burned to the ground by the British, those dastardly British people in the War of 1812. And then once it was rebuilt by 1847, citizens that lived west of the Potomac River decided they no longer wanted to be part of DC. They wanted to go back to Virginia. And so if you look at a map of DC, DC is a perfect diamond to the northwest, northeast, and southeast. But then when you get to the southwest port, it basically just follows along the Potomac River.
Hmm.
And so that's why the city looks the way it does today. The city goes through a huge explosion after the Civil War, as does most of the country. There is a redesign of the Capitol by 1901. By 1912, you have the first cherry trees are gifted to the city by the mayor of Tokyo. And so this is the reason why, the mall in particular is known for its cherry blossoms. 1961, with the passage of the 23rd Amendment, citizens of DC can vote for president. And then by 1973, the citizens can vote for their own mayor. Now, I will tell you that in the short time that they've had the power to vote for their own mayor, they've certainly missed the mark on a couple of occasions.
What are you talking about?
Well, they've
Talking
just been some
politically,
very,
or
say again?
you're talking politically?
Politically, morally, just there's a bunch of different issues that they've had with some of their mayors. Now, some of those same people are beloved in much the same ways. If you go to Louisiana, everyone talks about Huey Long like he was some sort of gift to the common man, but he was as corrupt and crooked as the day is long. And so you have these kind of populist rulers that are horribly imperfect, but they connect with the people. And so Marion Barry is perhaps the one that most people think of when they think of DC mayors. And, he had a bunch of troubles, but you also find a statue to him in DC.
Well, the end of that story went pretty quickly. I was wondering, the there's a piece missing, before, I guess, Reconstruction, and they get into the Civil War. What happened there? Because I've never heard
So
you tell
DC,
me about it.
so DC is one of those places that was at the center of a lot of the compromises and controversies leading up to the Civil War. And one of the big ones was the fact that there was a lot of Northern congressmen that were embarrassed that there was actually slave trading in the capital prior to the Civil War. And so, because the idea is a visitor comes to the United States, they go to DC, and one of the first things they see is they see these poor folks being bought, sold, and treated, and sent to God knows what kind of conditions. And so one of the things that was designed to try to make DC, at least on the surface, more palatable was to get rid of the slave trade. And that's what happens. There was a compromise that was created 1850. California had entered into the Union or wanted to become a part of the Union. And there was a whole ton of compromises that were a part of making this happen. One of those compromises was the banishment of slave trade in DC. And so that kind of signals a transition for the capital to kind of get away from the what was called the peculiar institution. And now they can kind of separate themselves completely. They don't do anything towards slavery out of hand, but at least in DC, you can no longer trade slaves.
I'm thinking about, sharing this with anybody I know who's taking, say, AP US history. Do they talk about what you just mentioned in the detail that you just gave?
So you talk about the 1850 compromise, that's for sure. DC as a city doesn't really, outside of political machinations, the city itself does not feature prominently in the history of the country beyond a couple of moments, whether you're talking about the burning of the Capitol in 1812, whether you're talking about the formation of the Capitol a couple of decades before that. And then, of course, uh, uh, the kind of the growth of the city throughout the late 1800s, early 1900s. The city itself, though, it's kind of strange because you can go to like Philadelphia, you go to Baltimore, you can go to Boston, and history is there, and you can see where history is made. The very essence of Washington, D.C. is history. So you can't really nail down how much, because all the decisions that this country has ever gone through, it was made in these hallways and these streets and these cafes and these restaurants. But it's not something that it's much more dispersed than you might find, say, you go to Philadelphia, you go to Independence Hall, and you're like, okay, that's where they wrote the Constitution. Things are happening in a very fluid nature. And even today, we were talking with a friend of ours that lives up there for right now. We had dinner with him, and he talks about the fact that everything is it's either expressly said or it's hinted at to have a kind of a political connotation to the conversation. So these things happen all over the place.
Hmm.
And so what you have is you have an amazing historical center. This is the National Mall. This is where you have the White House on one end, and then you have the Washington Monument, which by the way is the second Washington Monument, the first one in the great city of Baltimore, Maryland.
Oh, okay.
Then you have the Capitol building, you've got Lincoln Memorial, the Jefferson Memorial, you got all these kind of places. And man, for all of the knuckleheadedness that goes on in that city still impresses when you see these buildings.
So what do you do when you have a couple of days, with your daughter who's new to the place? What do you pick? I mean, you can only do so much.
You can, and unfortunately, uh, circumstances beyond our control kind of contributed to how we did this. For example, there's a couple of walkways that go near the White House, but you can't go there because at least when we were there, they were setting up for the tree lighting ceremony. And so that whole area was blocked off. So we saw DC, we saw the White House from afar. Um, but I basically asked my daughter before we left, I said, what kind of things are you interested in seeing? What kind, not asking her about specific museums. I just asked her, if you're going to a new city, what kind of things you want to see? And she said, well, I want to see something about science. I said, okay. So we went to the Air and Space Museum, which is a great place. If you've ever been there, just talks about the history of aviation, not just in the United States, but before that. She goes, I want to see the White House. Bam. So we saw the White House. She mentioned that she wanted to see art, and this is one of the things we didn't quite get to, but the National Art Gallery is a beautiful place to go check out. What we did see, this is kind of cool. You and I both like languages. They have a museum there called Planet Word, and it was actually created by a former first grade teacher and wife of Tom Friedman, the writer from the New York Times, and it's all about the development of language. And there's so much interactions to this museum. There's so much stuff for kids to get into. Now, here's the problem with it. Because it's a perfect place for kids, you've got to hurdle buses full of kids as you go through it. But even that does not take away from how cool that museum was.
So how much time do you spend in that type of a museum? It sounds like, perfect for young people.
It is perfect, and we stayed not nearly as long as we could have stayed. I think the amount of kiddos in that place kind of tampered things down a little bit, but you could easily stay there for a couple of hours. And what's great is down at the basement. This is held at the old Franklin School, one of the early schools built in DC. And on the basement, they have a restaurant called Immigrant Food. And it focuses on, the street foods of different people that come to DC and make it their home. And so you have this incredible literary experience. Then you go downstairs and you have this incredible culinary experience. It's a 1-2 punch. It's hard to beat.
Oh, so have you been there before to that restaurant?
I had
Or
not been to that restaurant. I had not been to that museum. The museum is relatively new. I think it's only been around about 4 or 5 years. But the concept of the museum is extraordinary. Just talking about the English language, how it's used, the different ways that it's used, where do our words come from? Be it Germanic, be it Romance languages, be it Greek, or just a hodgepodge of other cultures. It's just kind of cool looking at the etymology of these words, but done so in such a way that the kids are learning, but they don't quite know they're learning.
I feel bad that I haven't been there or taken my kids to our nation's capital.
Do you think Where do you think your kids' interest is in history in general?
Um, that's a real awkward question because I don't really know. I mean, they're they all are taking or took the full array of advanced placement courses, and they enjoyed the course to the extent that they liked the teacher.
Right.
But they all did really well, and they were up to the challenge, and they studied and did all of that. But um, those types of courses maybe hit you later. In high school, you learn what you need to know, but it doesn't necessarily develop a love of history until maybe later. Maybe you encounter something in college, but you've learned a methodology of looking back and reading, that type of thing, or not reading and using some of the more current methods of watching history on through video. But they're really watching lectures, so it's
Right.
not just little videos on the History Channel. And so that to me, that's a good thing. They're getting a lot of lectures. But I don't know. You should ask them next time you're here. They would be a really great conversation. Well, Mr. Miller, it's triggered this lifelong interest. I'm really narrowing my focus now to things on the west side of the Potomac. Really, stuck. You're not going to get that kind of satisfaction, I don't think.
I think the reason why I asked, besides making you a little bit uncomfortable, because I kind of knew that's where that conversation was going.
I don't get uncomfortable. I don't feel stress. I cause stress. That's
Yes, yes, yes.
wrong.
But I think this is the tricky part about DC is that DC is one of those cities where when you go to an historical place, the historicity of the place is not self-evident. You have to kind of describe it. You look at the White House, you can say, well, that's a pretty house. And they've heard the words before White House. By the way, White House was not the original name of that building. It was actually originally referred to as the Presidential Palace. It was not until Andrew Jackson became president in the 1830s that he started referring to it as the White House. And it's kind of been that way ever since. But the kids have heard the word White House before, and so they see the White House and it's okay, yeah, that's White House. Same thing with the Capitol building. But once you get into some of these other things, some of these other memorials, these are not just experiences, these are also conversations that have to take place. And so that's both good and bad. It depends upon what kind of attention span your kid has, you know. And so, but I think that what makes DC both challenging sometimes to visit, but also that much cooler to visit is that it's a multi-layered experience. It's not just the visual, but it's also, the historical that you have to learn a little bit about to kind of better appreciate what you're looking at.
So you would probably be the ideal, best, most engaging, knowledgeable tour guide that's ever lived. Have you thought
Well,
about that? No, you'd be great at it, except for you're talking to people who are you're having to talk over them maybe. But I mean, just the content of what you would say, it would be fascinating. I think people would jump in line to do that. That's my thought.
well, I appreciate you saying that. There's the incredible thing about a lot of the tour guides that you could find in places like DC is that their level of knowledge is extraordinary. And while I know a lot from a surveyor's point of view, I mean, you can imagine what kind of experience you would have with someone who knows about that place at a deep personal level. I mean, I know it from afar. I know it as DC. I know it as a center of our country's history and political machinations. But Yeah, I think anytime you go to some place and you have a guide to kind of help you experience it, I think that's going to be hard to beat.
So this is kind of we've talked about what it means to be well educated. In fact, in our book, we wrote about, having these strands of history in front of you where you could talk in great detail about things without notes, in all these different areas. And we listed them for each of us in the book.
Mm,
Uh, but I've never really thought about the, the tour guide notion. So stay with me on this. But,
okay.
but if you're going on, or, the whole planet, every place in the world, and um, you're going to get somebody to be your tour guide, but it's one person taking you to all these places. That could be a measure of of knowledge in a way that different cultures, and you'd be very comfortable, even though you, like you said, you don't know all the details. But I kind of look at you. You have we're not talking about just American history. You've been a lot of places and you have a lot of knowledge. And I think it's a good measure because most people, and this is a problem of our, even university level, they specialize so early and they just stick with that,
Mm.
and so we throw around the idea of lifelong learning. It's kind of always in quotes, um, because people don't really know what it means, but in a way that's what it means, that you gather actual experiences traveling and reading and so forth, and eventually you have this broad view. So it's a different way to assess more than knowledge, but experience. To me, it's intriguing because it's not just something you can get by reading a bunch of books.
Well, we talked about before, Rick Steves says that the greatest thing travel does for you is that it provides for you a different perspective. But I
Hmm.
think also it's about learning a different narrative about how a group of people see themselves, how they see themselves in relation to other people. When I was in Athens and I was walking up to the Parthenon, it is hard not to visualize the people who most likely walked the same steps you did. And then that gets you going in a bunch of different directions. For example, when you're walking up towards the Parthenon, the area starts in the Agora, which is the old marketplace of the original city, and then you kind of go up from there. As you go up from there, you hit Mars Hill. Mars Hill is the spot where Paul preached to the Athenians about the invisible God. And you sit there on Mars Hill and you're thinking, good Lord, I am walking in the same footsteps as the Apostle Paul. You go down to the Agora and you're thinking to yourself, my God, Aristotle probably walked these steps. Alexander the Great probably walked these steps. Who knows who else? And to me, it allows you then to start doing these deep dives into these different narratives about how the city sees itself, how the city sees the history that kind of evolved around it. And I think you could certainly do that in Washington, D.C. also. But it makes it a lot more fun to travel if you do so with an open mind and open willingness to kind of open yourself to that experience.
Well, anything in the United States um, is relatively new history, unless you go behind, way back, with the Native Americans. But we've probably not on this podcast, but talk about, you've spent a lot of time in Europe, and they have I think a different view of living in history than we might, looking at more as I don't know. I want to hear what you say, but sort of like this snapshot view, as opposed to you're actually living in it and kind of used to it.
What's interesting is that Europeans also have just a different notion of what it means to live. So, and I'll give you an example of what I mean with a very mundane topic. The topic is city zoning. So in the United States, if you have an area that's zoned for residential, single family residential homes, the only thing that you will find in that neighborhood are single family homes. If you go to Germany, for instance, and you go to a residential neighborhood, the residential neighborhood is different from the US in two very important ways. One is that residential is not necessarily only one kind of living. Now they have places where it's just single family homes, but in a lot of like the cities and what have you, they have single family homes, they have apartments, they have duplexes, they have, whatever the case may be. It's a host of things. Not only that, but the second way that it's very different is that they include as to what is allowed in a residential area, those things which makes living possible. Grocery stores, bakeries. That's why you can have a bakery between two houses and no one's freaking out because to the German mindset, it's not just about your ability to live, but to live well. And you to live well, you must be within walking distance of a grocery store, a bakery, or bar, or whatever the case may be. And so I think, you look at how we look at things and it's one way. And I'm not saying that it's lesser or greater than anybody else, but that's the kind of thing you learn when you travel someplace else is you get confronted with other ways of looking at something that you thought in your mind was settled.
So, while you were mentioning that, I was thinking about Rudesheim. We've both been there, on the
Yes.
right. And above it, where our one of our colleagues' home is, it's a place called Eibingen. It's the higher part of the hill. And then as you go down there, there's a very large church. You would call it more of a monastery, actually. And you
Hmm.
have vineyards there, and then you go down a little bit more. And yeah, you have bakeries, maybe a pizza place. You have a few really good restaurants where they have really good wine. But you're always kind of surprised when you have breakfast there, and then there's bread, fresh bread on the breakfast table because they did, and you've stayed places where it's practically next door.
Hmm.
You go get that, and it is a quality of life, and you're not having to drive away from your home and go into the town, and into a city or whatever, and then come back. It's self-sufficient, and you tend to develop community at those places. And I think that's what may be missing also is those places are places to convene to you get to know the people in your neighborhood very well, whereas we often don't know the people right next to us.
It's interesting that you brought that up because I think the notion of community definitely ties in. It seems like it works better in the European setup as opposed to the American setup. But I will tell you to go back to DC,
Yeah.
my experiences with DC as a younger man and as a kid, DC has a rough reputation. There is the historical bit, there's the tourist bit, and there's the places that everyone goes. And then there are the places in DC where no tourist goes. And these are areas that could be considered quite, sketchy depending upon where you are, what time of day it is, that sort of thing. First of all, every city has these areas. And so the fact that DC has it should be neither uh, a voice of concern or anything out of the ordinary. It happens, you know. But even in those places, I think the thing that struck me most this past time is how lovely the people were there, how quick they were to help, how quick they were to kind of point you in the right direction. I think the people in that city understand that they are a destination point, and so there's a certain amount of responsibility that comes with living in a kind of a destination point, but that you can feel the community there. And I think in those big cities in the Northeast, I think that they have a better handle just out of necessity, not because of design, but I think they have a better handle at helping one another out. And you can sense that when you go there.
So you grew up there, and my impression,
I grew up in
right,
Baltimore.
right, but the same type of an atmosphere where the neighborhood becomes a community much more than here. And I think there are a lot of reasons, but if the adults know each other, it allows everybody to function.
Well, I mean, somebody rather pithily said it takes a village, and I can accept that to a certain degree because the village used to spank the hell out of me when I was a kid, because any parent could do it if they caught you doing something wrong.
Yeah.
And so I didn't quite appreciate the community's aspect of things at that time.
Here comes Ross again. They just whack you for no
As
reason.
that knucklehead kid, something wrong with him. But no, I mean, so there's an aspect of that, and as bad as that was on some instances as a kid, on other times you realize that it creates a safety that you don't get too many other places. And I don't think my daughter gets it where I am. I'm smack dab in the kind of suburbia that Ray Liotta took a deep breath over.
Was thinking exactly about just
And
that look on his face, wearing his what bathrobe, getting the newspaper, and just kind of, oh boy, here I am.
yeah, yeah. And so I mean, we got some lovely people in our immediate surroundings, but there is no ability for my daughter to really get to know people beyond this immediate vicinity. Whereas, because there's no shared space that they all go to, maybe the park on the 4th of July, but once a year doesn't really cut it. And so I think DC has that to a certain extent, like a lot of other Northeastern cities. They have these kind of ready made communities that come across a bit more European than they do, say, in suburbia Texas.
Okay, I think that's what it is, and Europe is set up for visiting, walking around, uh, in many cases better, but our cities have a lot of that, depending on which one,
Right,
where it's compressed and you can see a lot and have a lot of options right there. And I think that's a an advantage of a bigger city. These places we talked about in Germany don't have a lot of options.
right,
Where should we go tonight? We'll go here or here. Which
right.
one? And that's not the problem in Baltimore, certainly, or DC.
There is something about, the Dalai Lama talked about the paralyzation of choice. I mean, there does become a point where, you get to a point of diminishing returns. But I think one of the things that people don't think about DC is that as much as it is true for New York City, Washington, D.C. is an international city.
Mhm.
And so no matter what you're into, no matter what you like, no matter where your tastes flow in the direction of, there are places in DC to kind of help satisfy those yearnings. And so, whether you're hungry for Ethiopian, whether you're hungry for Greek, whether you're hungry for Thai, whatever the case may be. Now, here in suburbia Texas, we got an Indian Nepalese place down the street. That's pretty special. But in Texas, you're just as likely to come across a Mexican place or a Vietnamese place, and that may be the extent of it. But DC, I think, is not recognized enough as being an international city, even though it should be rather self-evident as a national capital.
So in Washington, D.C., do they have quarters like they do in New York, where here's the I don't know, you call it Chinatown or a French Quarter, or are they sort of segregated like that, or is it mixed up?
So one of the things when you look at DC is that a lot of them are usually based upon some sort of institution that existed there. But they also go to some of the earlier communities that you might come across. So, like in Washington, D.C., one of the places that, and this really wasn't incorporated into D.C. until much later, but you're talking about some place like Georgetown,
Hmm.
is kind of like a part of that. Georgetown is a part of what is referred to. So, D.C. is broken up into wards,
Okay.
and so you have several wards that you can go to. Georgetown is, I'm trying to remember what part of the city Georgetown is in,
Well, I
but
have it
like,
right
you
here.
know the what am I thinking of, like the eighth ward of DC. This is where you might get Congress Heights. This is where you might get the Navy Yards. This is like southeast DC. Then you go all the way up to the first ward of the city. This is where you get to Howard University. This is where you get Mount Pleasant. This is where you get Meridian Hill. And so, yeah, you have these neighborhoods, and that's where they basically stem from. They stem from these neighborhoods. Georgetown is in the second ward. This Georgetown is a part of this would be Foggy Bottom. This would be Mount Vernon Square. This would be Chinatown. DC's got a pretty stout Chinese quarter
Hmm.
in it. And so yeah, so you have these different wards that make up the city and kind of divide up the city. As far as like traditional ethnic neighborhoods, you do have Chinatown. There was, I think, it used to be a Little Italy section. I don't believe it exists anymore, but I think there used to be. I don't know how cohesive that is today.
Okay. Well, I'm looking at the map and there's, some of these really important sites and places are, across the river in Virginia. And I'm just going to list them because you have the Arlington National Cemetery, you have the Pentagon, Air Force Memorial, and um, and also the airport is
Yeah,
across.
Reagan is over there. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So are those places you visit also? I mean, I know you didn't this time, but are those, I mean, I guess you don't visit the Pentagon, right?
So the western side of the city, past the Potomac River,
Yeah,
it is a place worth visiting. But if you're going to DC to see the things that you associate with DC,
yeah,
you have to go into the city itself. The stuff that's in Virginia. Now you might fly into Reagan.
right.
By the way, interesting little side note about Reagan, the airport, not the president, although it has to do with the president. So for those of you who are old enough to remember, during the 1980s, there was a air traffic controller strike.
Right.
And Reagan basically told the union that they were going to have to stand down, that you cannot have a strike based off of air traffic controllers. And what Reagan does, Reagan echoes the words of an early political mentor in the form of Calvin Coolidge. Calvin Coolidge, who before being president was governor of Massachusetts, had a threat by the Boston police to go on strike. And what Calvin Coolidge said was that no one had the right to strike against the public safety.
Nice.
And when the air traffic controllers basically threatened to go on strike, Reagan used almost the exact same words verbatim, saying that the air traffic controllers did not have the right to strike against the public safety, which is certainly what would happen. And he told the union, he says, if y'all go on strike, I'm going to fire every single one of you, and then you're going to have to apply for your jobs again. The unions, no union had ever seen a president get this involved in a labor dispute since Teddy Roosevelt did it against Northern Securities, which was a coal company. And Reagan said, well, I just told you what's going to happen. You decide what you're going to do. They go on strike. He fires every single one of them. Now, that strike started at National Airport, which, for reasons I'm not quite sure how it came to be, is now known as Reagan National Airport. And so I don't know if this is someone's idea of a joke.
Um,
It's funny, but
no, it's a great story, first of all. Um, so things did happen on that side of the
oh
Potomac,
yeah.
but um, I'm sure you've been to the National Cemetery.
Yeah, the National Cemetery, and I've been very fortunate to have been to several. There's a National Cemetery outside of St. Louis.
Hmm.
There's a National Cemetery in Wyoming, with near was actually in the same place as uh, Little Bighorn, where Custer met his end.
I've been there.
And of course, I've been to the national cemeteries at Normandy.
Hmm.
And it's one of those things, and it seems trite to say it, but if you've never been, especially you go to someplace like Arlington or you go to someplace like Normandy, it is difficult to express to someone who does not have the experience about how much that visit impacts you.
Hmm.
Everyone talks about, hey, this is Memorial Day. We're going to give some thoughts to the people who gave their life.
Right.
And it's always talked about in a way that cannot be made concrete. It's an abstract concept. And then when you get to a place like Arlington or you get to a place like Normandy, the abstract becomes concrete. And the concrete is those marble crosses that are in perfect rows, or marble Star of Davids, or whatever the case may be, that signify this guy gave his life
Right.
for us in our country on this date. And I don't know how you're ever able to separate those two things again. Once you've had that experience, it's hard to go back only thinking about it as an abstract concept.
That would be a place for everybody to visit to get that perspective. And of course, you served, and that has a lot of weight also when you visit. I'm sure you have a lot of personal thoughts, about your experience. So I'm sure you go there also.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, when they join the military, they're not necessarily thinking, I'm going to join to fight for my country. I mean, that that's an aspect of the job, but I'm 18 when I joined the military.
Yeah,
And at 18, as worldly as I was, if you want to call it worldly, having grown up in Baltimore and surrounded by all these different kinds of people, um, your notions of what's important and why things are important are shockingly limited, and it becomes even more shocking when the veil of ignorance gets lifted a bit, and then you start becoming a little bit more aware of what it is that you've been talking about for the last 4 years, And even though you may not have had that direct experience, once you have that experience, it provides a different understanding. And it's not an understanding that you can explain to people. That's why I stopped
yeah,
talking about, I think after about 5 or 10 years, I stopped talking about my military experience
right.
because because unless you've had it, and it seems snobbish a little bit in a ways, but unless you've had experience, it's hard to understand. And it's hard to understand what's funny. It's hard to understand what's serious. It's hard to understand. You just don't have the context to get it.
Makes
But
sense.
you look at a row of graves and you can get it.
Yeah. So there are limitations to reading and even travel. What you've experienced, you can't really compare to that.
Yeah, but I would also say that that's probably the extent of what's not available to the curious mind.
Right.
I think the beautiful thing about being in, I get that I am fortunate to be able to see all these places that I've seen. Most of it on Uncle Sam's dime,
Mm.
sometimes on the dime of wealthy suburbanite parents who helped pay for my trip to go overseas. But but the notion that that travel can fill so many of the voids that we have in our understanding of things, it's it makes it well worth the attempt.
Well, we can't really follow that here, Miller. We probably should wrap up. That's a sentiment, and we traveled some distance on the conversation, but I like the way we landed.
I think yeah, and I think so too. So we will call it a day for now, and then there is football to watch. We need to keep our perspective on things.
Of course, of course.
Army Navy,
Oh, apropos.
apropos, ladies and gentlemen,
Um,
listen closely. Go Navy, beat Army. So,
it's as straightforward as you can get.
all right. Thank y'all so much. Congratulations. You made it to the end of the podcast. Thank you so
Yes.
much for listening. Dr. Bourgeois, I appreciate you. Thank you very much. And with that, I shall say adieu.
Auf Wiedersehen, Herr Miller.